Don't scroll. This is not a coincidence. You think you're waiting. But something already ended behind you, and the strange part is not the ending itself but the silence with which it left your life, because endings are rarely loud. They don't always come with slammed doors or final words or dramatic goodbyes. Sometimes they happen in the background of your life while you're busy hoping, while you're still checking your phone, still replaying conversations, still convincing yourself that things are just on pause. But the truth is far heavier than that, because what you call waiting is often just your heart refusing to accept what your soul has already felt, and deep down there is a part of you that already knows, a quiet awareness that something shifted, something closed, something that once had energy and connection and meaning is no longer alive in the same way, but you keep standing in the same place emotionally because moving forward feels like betrayal to everything you once believed in. And so you tell yourself that you're waiting for clarity, waiting for closure, waiting for a sign, waiting for the right moment. But what if the moment already came and you missed it because it didn't look the way you expected? What if the ending didn't announce itself because it wasn't meant to be negotiated, it was meant to be accepted? And that's the part that hurts the most, because acceptance doesn't come with control. It comes with surrender. And surrender feels like losing when in reality it's the only way to stop losing yourself in something that no longer exists, because when something ends behind you and you keep facing it, you're not actually holding on to it, you're holding on to a memory of it, a version of it that doesn't match your present reality anymore. And that's why it feels so confusing. Because your mind is living in the past while your life is trying to move forward, and that tension creates this feeling of being stuck, of being in between, of not knowing whether to let go or hold on tighter. But the truth is you're not in between anything, you're just standing at a door that has already closed, hoping it will open again if you wait long enough, if you feel deeply enough, if you care enough. But not every door reopens, and not every ending is meant to be reversed. Some endings exist to redirect you, to remove you from a path that no longer aligns with who you are becoming, even if it once aligned perfectly with who you used to be. And that's another painful truth people don't talk about enough. Sometimes things don't end because they were wrong. Sometimes they end because they're no longer right for who you are now, and that shift is subtle. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens in small moments, in changes in communication, in energy, in priorities, in the way something feels rather than what it looks like. And if you're honest with yourself, you probably felt it long before you admitted it. You felt the distance growing. You felt the connection weakening, you felt the difference between what was and what is, but you ignored it because you believed in what it used to be, and belief can be beautiful, but it can also blind you when you use it to avoid reality, because reality doesn't wait for your readiness, it just is, and the longer you resist it, the heavier it becomes, and that's why waiting can feel so exhausting. Because you're not just waiting for something external, you're fighting something internal. You're fighting the truth that is slowly becoming impossible to ignore, and every day that you stay in that space you drain your energy, your peace, your clarity, because deep down you're carrying something that has already been put down by the other side of your life, whether that's a person, a situation, a phase, or even a version of yourself. And it's hard to let go when you don't have a clear ending, when there's no final conversation, no explanation that satisfies your questions, no moment that feels complete. But closure doesn't always come from others. Sometimes it comes from your willingness to see what is already in front of you, to recognize patterns instead of promises, to trust actions over potential, to accept that silence is also an answer even if it's not the one you wanted, and once you begin to see that, something shifts inside you, not all at once, not dramatically, but quietly, the same way the ending happened. You start to loosen your grip. You start to realize that holding on is not keeping it alive, it's just keeping you stuck, and slowly you begin to turn around, not because you've stopped caring but because you've started respecting yourself enough to not stay where you're no longer met, and that's where real power begins, not in forcing something to continue but in allowing yourself to move on without needing everything to make sense, because not everything will make sense. Some things will just be what they are, unfinished in your mind but complete in reality. And that's okay, because your life is not meant to pause for something that has already ended. Your life is meant to continue, to expand, to evolve, and sometimes the very thing you're struggling to let go of is the thing that is blocking everything that is trying to come into your life next, and you won't see that until you step forward, until you stop looking back at something that is no longer there. And it's not easy, it's one of the hardest things you'll ever do. To walk away without full understanding, to accept without full explanation, to move on without full closure, but it's also one of the most freeing things, because the moment you stop waiting for something that has already ended is the moment you start living again, the moment you reclaim your energy, your focus, your direction, and you begin to realize that what felt like loss was actually space for something real, something aligned. Something that doesn't require you to question where you stand or whether you're still wanted or whether it's still alive. And one day you'll look back and understand that the ending didn't happen to hurt you, it happened to wake you up, to show you what you were holding on to and why, to teach you that not everything that begins is meant to last, but everything that ends leaves behind a lesson, and that lesson becomes a part of you, shaping how you see, how you choose, how you grow. And eventually you stop seeing the ending as something that took something from you and start seeing it as something that gave you something: clarity, strength, awareness, and the ability to recognize when something is no longer yours to carry. And when that moment comes, you won't feel the need to wait anymore, because you'll understand that you were never waiting for it to come back, you were waiting for yourself to let it go. Wait. Before you skip this, you need to hear this, because the reason you still feel stuck is not because the ending wasn't clear, it's because your mind is still trying to rewrite it into something that feels easier to accept, and that's what makes this so difficult, because you're not just dealing with what happened, you're dealing with what you hoped would happen. And hope can be one of the hardest things to release when it's attached to something that once felt real, something that once gave you peace, something that once made sense, because your mind keeps going back to those moments, trying to prove that it was real, trying to prove that it meant something, and it did, it truly did, but just because something was real doesn't mean it's still meant to continue. And that's where most people get trapped. They confuse "it was real" with "it must still be right," and those are two completely different things, because something can be genuine, meaningful, and still have an expiration that you didn't see coming, and when that expiration happens quietly, without a clear ending, it leaves you in this loop of overthinking, replaying, questioning, wondering if you missed something, wondering if you could fix something, wondering if it's really over or just temporarily paused, and that uncertainty becomes addictive in a way, because it gives you a reason to hold on. It gives you a reason to not move forward. It gives you a reason to stay emotionally connected to something that is no longer actively present in your life, and the longer you stay in that loop, the more you disconnect from your current reality, because your energy is constantly being pulled backward into something that has already finished its role in your life. And the truth is, if it was still meant for you, you wouldn't feel this constant confusion. You wouldn't feel like you're trying to decode silence. You wouldn't feel like you're the only one holding on. Because real alignment doesn't create that kind of emotional chaos. Real connection doesn't leave you guessing where you stand, and that's something you have to be honest with yourself about, even if it hurts, because clarity often comes with discomfort. It forces you to see things as they are instead of how you want them to be, and once you start seeing clearly, you realize that what you're calling waiting is actually resistance. Resistance to letting go. Resistance to accepting that something has already shifted beyond your control. Resistance to stepping into a new phase of your life that doesn't include what you've been holding on to. And that resistance can feel justified. It can feel like loyalty, like commitment, like you're not giving up too easily. But there's a difference between commitment and attachment. Commitment is mutual, it's supported from both sides, it grows and evolves. But attachment holds on even when there's nothing left to hold on to. It stays even when the connection is no longer being maintained, and if you're honest, you can feel that difference. You can feel when something is being carried by both sides and when it's only being carried by you, and that realization is painful because it forces you to confront the truth that you're the one keeping it alive in your mind while in reality it has already been released, and that's not a reflection of your worth. It's not a sign that you weren't enough. It simply means that the timing, the alignment, the direction, something about it no longer fits, and not everything that doesn't fit is meant to be forced back together. Some things are meant to fall apart so you can move towards something that actually aligns with where you're going, not where you've been, and the hardest part about that is letting go without having all the answers, because your mind wants a reason, it wants a clear explanation. It wants something to make it all make sense, but life doesn't always give you that. Sometimes the only answer you get is the shift itself, the change in energy, the absence where there used to be presence, the silence where there used to be communication, and that has to be enough, even if it doesn't feel satisfying, because waiting for a better answer is what keeps you stuck. It keeps you tied to something that has already ended, and every moment you spend waiting for clarity is a moment you're not giving to your own growth, your own healing, your own future. And that's the real cost of not letting go. It's not just about holding on to the past. It's about delaying everything that is meant for you next, because new things can't fully enter your life when you're still emotionally occupied with something that has already left, and that's why it feels like nothing is moving, like everything is paused, like you're in this strange in-between space where nothing is beginning but nothing is fully ending either. But that's not because life is stuck. It's because you haven't fully turned away from what's already behind you, and once you do, once you make that internal shift, even without closure, even without answers, something opens up, your energy changes, your perspective shifts, and you start to see opportunities, connections, and paths that were always there but you couldn't notice because your focus was somewhere else. And that's when you realize that moving on isn't about forgetting or pretending it didn't matter. It's about accepting that it had its place, it had its time, and now it's completed its purpose, and you're allowed to step forward without carrying it with you. You're allowed to release it without feeling guilty. You're allowed to choose yourself without needing permission from something that is no longer present, and that's where your power truly is, not in holding on, not in waiting endlessly, but in recognizing when it's time to walk away, even if your heart takes a little longer to catch up with what your soul already knows. Stop. Don't scroll past this, because this is the part no one tells you, the part where you slowly realize that the reason it still hurts isn't because it's still happening, it's because you're still emotionally present in something that has already moved on without you, and that realization hits differently, because it forces you to see that the pain you're feeling right now is not coming from the ending itself. It's coming from the gap between where you are emotionally and where reality already is, and that gap is what creates confusion, overthinking, sleepless nights, constant checking, and that quiet heaviness in your chest that you can't fully explain to anyone, because on the outside it looks like nothing is happening, but inside you're still processing something that your life has technically already moved past, and that's why it feels so isolating, because you're grieving something that doesn't even feel officially over. There was no clear goodbye, no final moment where everything made sense. Just a slow shift, a fading, a change that left you with more questions than answers, and your mind keeps trying to solve it like a puzzle, trying to find the exact moment where it went wrong, trying to identify the one thing you could have done differently to change the outcome. But the truth is, not everything ends because of a single mistake. Sometimes things end because they were only meant to exist for a certain period of your life, and once that period is over, no amount of effort, no amount of overthinking, no amount of emotional investment can bring it back to what it used to be, because it's not the same anymore, and deep down you know that. You can feel that something about it is different, something about it doesn't flow the way it once did, but you keep holding on to the memory of how it felt before, and that memory becomes your reference point, your standard, the thing you keep comparing everything to, and that's what keeps you stuck. Because you're not allowing yourself to fully experience what is, you're constantly measuring it against what was, and nothing in the present can compete with a memory that has been idealized over time, because memories don't carry the same imperfections, the same inconsistencies, the same reality that the present does. They become simplified, softened, sometimes even romanticized, and that makes it even harder to let go, because you're not just letting go of a person or a situation. You're letting go of a version of it that felt perfect in your mind, and that's why it feels like such a loss. Because in a way it is, it's the loss of what you believed it could be, the loss of what you imagined it would become, the loss of a future that you had already started to see in your head, and letting go of that is not easy. It requires you to rewrite your expectations, to accept a different outcome than the one you were emotionally preparing for, and that takes time, it takes honesty. It takes a willingness to sit with discomfort instead of escaping into hope, because hope can sometimes keep you in a loop longer than necessary. It can convince you that things will change even when all the evidence is showing you that they already have, and that's where you have to be careful. Because there's a difference between healthy hope and denial. Healthy hope allows space for growth and change, but denial ignores reality to maintain comfort, and if you're constantly feeling confused, constantly feeling like you don't know where you stand, constantly feeling like you're the only one trying to keep something alive, then you're not in a space of mutual connection anymore. You're in a space of one-sided attachment, and that's something you have to acknowledge, not to blame yourself, not to feel guilty, but to free yourself, because you deserve clarity, you deserve consistency, you deserve to feel secure in whatever connection you're part of, and if you're not feeling that, then it's not something you should keep waiting for indefinitely. Because waiting doesn't create clarity, it just delays acceptance, and the longer you delay acceptance, the longer you stay stuck in a situation that has already completed its course, and that's why it's so important to shift your focus, not back to what you lost, but forward to what you're gaining by letting go, because every ending creates space for something new, something aligned, something that doesn't require you to question your worth or your place. Something that flows naturally instead of feeling forced or uncertain, and you won't be able to fully step into that space until you release what's already behind you, not partially, not temporarily, but completely, and that doesn't mean you stop caring overnight, it doesn't mean you forget everything instantly, it means you make a decision, a conscious choice to stop investing your energy into something that is no longer giving back to you, to stop revisiting the same thoughts, the same memories, the same what-if scenarios that keep you emotionally tied to the past, and to start redirecting that energy toward yourself, your growth, your peace, your future, because at the end of the day, the most important thing is not what ended, it's what you choose to do after it ends, and that choice determines whether you stay stuck looking back or start moving forward into something that is actually meant for you, something that doesn't leave you waiting, something that doesn't leave you questioning, something that doesn't leave you feeling like you're holding on to something alone, and once you truly understand that, not just intellectually but emotionally, you'll stop seeing the ending as something that took something away from you and start seeing it as something that cleared the path for something better, something real, something that meets you fully instead of leaving you halfway, and that's when everything begins to change, not because the past suddenly makes sense, but because you finally stop needing it to wait. Read this slowly, because this is where everything becomes real for you. This is the moment where you stop asking, why did it end, and start asking, why am I still holding on to something that has already shown me it's over, and that shift is uncomfortable because it puts the focus back on you, not in a blaming way but in an awakening way, because the truth is you didn't stay because you didn't see the signs. You stayed because you felt something deep and you didn't want to lose it. You stayed because you believed in the connection, because you saw potential, because you thought maybe it just needed more time, more patience, more understanding, but what you didn't realize is that you were slowly becoming the only one maintaining that belief, the only one keeping it alive emotionally. And that's exhausting in a way that no one else can fully understand, because from the outside it looks like nothing is wrong. But inside you're carrying conversations that never happened, answers you never received, clarity that never came, and over time that starts to drain you, not just emotionally but mentally, because you're constantly trying to make sense of something that no longer makes sense. And the hardest part is accepting that there might not be a clear explanation, there might not be a moment where everything clicks and you finally understand why it happened the way it did. Sometimes the only clarity you get is the ending itself, the distance, the silence, the shift in energy. And that has to be enough even if it doesn't feel like it. Because waiting for a better explanation is what keeps you tied to it. It keeps you hoping, keeps you checking, keeps you emotionally invested in something that has already moved on, and that's where you have to be honest with yourself in a way you might have been avoiding. You have to ask yourself if you're holding on because it still exists or because you don't want to face the emptiness that comes after letting go, because sometimes it's not the person or the situation that we're afraid to lose, it's the feeling, the routine, the familiarity, the version of ourselves that existed within that connection, and when that's gone, it leaves a space that feels uncomfortable, unfamiliar, even a little scary, and instead of stepping into that space, you keep looking back because at least the past feels known, even if it hurts. But growth doesn't happen in what's known, it happens in what's unfamiliar. It happens when you finally turn around and accept that what's behind you is no longer yours to carry. And that doesn't mean it didn't matter, it doesn't mean it wasn't real, it just means it has completed its place in your life, and now it's time for you to complete your part by letting it go, not forcefully, not angrily, but consciously, with awareness, with acceptance, with the understanding that holding on is not going to bring it back. It's only going to keep you stuck in a version of your life that no longer exists. And once you start to truly accept that, something begins to change inside you, not instantly, not dramatically, but subtly. You start to feel a little lighter, a little clearer, a little more present, because your energy is no longer tied to something behind you, it starts to return to you, and that's when you begin to reconnect with yourself, with your thoughts, your goals, your direction, things that you may have unconsciously put on hold while you were waiting. And you realize that life didn't stop, you just paused yourself, and now you have a choice. You can either keep standing in the same place hoping something behind you comes back, or you can step forward into something new, something unknown, something that might actually align with who you are becoming now, not who you were before. And that choice is not easy, because stepping forward means fully accepting that it's over. It means closing the door without knowing what's on the other side. But staying where you are is not an option either, because that space is no longer alive. It's just familiar, and there's a difference, and once you understand that difference, you'll stop confusing comfort with alignment. You'll stop mistaking familiarity for something that is meant to stay, and you'll begin to trust that if something has truly ended, it's not to punish you, it's to redirect you, to move you towards something that you can't see yet because you're still looking in the wrong direction. And the moment you finally turn around, the moment you finally release what's behind you, you'll start to notice things shifting, opportunities, people, experiences that were always there but you couldn't see because your focus was somewhere else, and that's when it all starts to make sense in a different way, not through answers about the past but through movement toward the future, and you'll realize that you were never meant to stay where you were only meant to pass through it, learn from it, feel it, grow from it, and then move on. And the only thing that was delaying that process was your unwillingness to let go. But once you do, once you finally release it completely, you'll understand that you were never really waiting for it to come back, you were waiting for the strength within yourself to walk away.